Metroid is a series that has been neglected for a long time now. It's been 19 years since Fusion came out. To put that into perspective, I hadn't been born yet. Being fair, Zero Mission came out in 2004 along with Prime 3 in 2007. Plus, 3 years later, Nintendo had a really funny joke. But after that, all we'd gotten from the Metroid series until right now was a remake that made Metroid 2 playable and an entire SNL skit. So in the past 20 years we've gotten 4 2D Metroid games, 2 of them being remakes and another one being bad. So Nintendo really needed to step up their game with this one. Metroid Dread is the newest entry in the 2D side of the Metroid series, and it picks up right where Fusion left off, with the Metroids and X-Parasites being entirely wiped from existence. Well, I guess they were just straight up lying then. But you know what? Who cares? 2 seconds later, Samus loses her armor to physical amnesia. I mean, is that like a joke or something? Okay, so the story of Metroid Dread is probably the weakest aspect of the game. Not that it's necessarily bad or anything, but a lot of the story relies on you being familiar with the story of the previous games, which is fine if you really understand some of the deeper lore of the Metroid series, but if you didn't know Samus was raised by bird people, you might as well give up now. And on top of that, the story can be kinda cryptic sometimes. For example, what's Brother Brain doing here? This was never explained. Besides that, the story does its job, and at the end there are some pretty cool things that it does too, so I can't really hate on it that much, but either way, the story is very Metroid. Now, let's talk about what actually matters in a Metroid game. Dread's gameplay is very similar to its predecessors, which more or less means that it's an action-adventure game with a big emphasis on exploration. In short, it's a Metroidvania. Let's start by talking about the good. The controls of Dread are very fluid and intuitive. The only thing that I think could make movement better is if my Joy-Cons didn't drift more than a Toyota Corolla. Also, as someone who hasn't played the Samus Returns remake, this was my first time experiencing both the 360 aiming and parrying mechanics, and I gotta say, both are done damn near perfectly. Being able to directly aim and shoot at things is a huge upgrade over only being able to shift my shots to different 45-degree angles. And while it took me a while to get used to using the parrying mechanic, man it feels good to just instantly demolish things with it. The only problem that I have with the parrying mechanic is how it's used in cutscenes as a sort of quick time event. Cutscenes happened semi-frequently in Dread, and sadly, I was almost never able to watch them without keeping my finger on the X button because sometimes, just seemingly out of nowhere, they turn into quick time events. And I really hate that because the cutscenes in Dread look great, and it's awesome to see Samus just being cool, but it would have been nice to just be able to watch them without constantly scanning the screen for a yellow flash. Anyway, let's talk about the bosses. They're awesome. No spoilers, of course, but man, the bosses were cool. They were the perfect balance of difficulty and fun. Every time I beat a boss, I felt super satisfied. I kinda wish this wasn't spoiler-free so I could go further in depth with this section, but I just have to say that the bosses in Dread are probably the strongest part of the game. I absolutely adore them. A big new addition to Metroid Dread was the Emmy mechanic. Emmy is a robot that is more or less invincible, and if it catches you, you're more or less dead. There is a chance to parry Emmy at the last second, but it's very hard to pull off, and even by the end of the game, I still couldn't do it consistently. Honestly, I'm kinda split on the whole idea of the Emmys. I think it added some excitement to certain parts of the game, and it was definitely a bit scary my first few times dealing with it, but by the end of the game, I was just kinda sick of it. I was hoping that the Emmy sections would be more about sneaking around the area without getting caught or solving puzzles while a killer robot chased after you, but while those two things did happen extremely rarely, the majority of the Emmy sections just boiled down to me trying to get out of there as fast as I could and not really thinking about strategy. Honestly, despite my dislike for Fusion, I think Fusion did a far better job at creating a scary, seemingly invincible enemy than Dread did. Overall, while I like the idea of the Emmy, I think that it should have been expanded upon further than it was, and some better AI and cooler scenarios probably would have helped it out too. Difficulty has been a seemingly hot topic with Dread since release. Apparently, people think it's hard. Now personally, I didn't even notice. Ah! Yes! I did it! I did the thing! No! That was awesome. Okay. Am I safe now? Invisible mode. Oh my god! Got him. Okay. Alright, video game. What the? In all seriousness though, while the game is hard, I believe that it's very fair, and I never got all that frustrated with the game. The only thing I really struggled with in the game was the final boss, which I understand because it's supposed to be the ultimate challenge, but there's a certain phase of the fight that's kinda cruel if you aren't really sure what to do. One thing I will defend in the difficulty department of Metroid Dread is the hidden block mechanic. I understand it can be kind of strange and confusing to new players, but honestly, I still believe it's fair. For instance, wow, what's this? I can't live in this area because it's too spicy for me. Wow, but that place looks safe. I wonder how I can get in there. Hey look, a hole in the wall where the tunnel was. Whoa! But hey, maybe that wasn't a fair comparison. I see this video circulating a lot. Let's see what happened.
And shoot the ceiling. What? Why? There's no indication on the map, there's no indication visually that the ceiling needs to be shot. Watch this. This is ridiculous.
Oh, why would I know that? Why would I ever have known to do that? Why would anyone know to do that?
They wouldn't.
Let's talk about why he should have known to do that. For starters, most people walking into the room would immediately shoot the enemy on the ceiling, but for the sake of argument, let's say that didn't happen. I'm pretty sure anyone that's ever played a video game before would find this room suspicious. Why is there a hallway that leads to nowhere? What are the enemies doing up there that I can see but not kill? Why would the game designers intentionally show me this room that I seemingly can't get into? And you can't even blame it on the game not telling you. The tutorial even makes you break a wall in order to progress. The whole idea of the mechanic is to try to get the player to notice things about their surroundings that they wouldn't have before. Things that look off or things that look weird, then reward them for picking up on that. I understand it's not something you see much in games anymore, but I don't think it's comparable to the BS from NES games. Dread's map is far more complicated when compared to its predecessors. While I can imagine the simplicity of the map previously was more so due to the hardware limitations rather than the actual design decisions, I actually prefer the more simplistic map from Zero Mission, Fusion, and Super. While the new map goes further in depth and shows more information than the previous ones, it suffers from being a bit claustrophobic and overbearing. I haven't seen many people talking about this, but man, it really messed with me. You can even place waypoints now, which I can imagine would help some people, but for me it just confirmed my fear that the map was way too complicated for me. On that note, I did end up getting used to it by the end of my playthrough, and I understand why they did it, but I still would have vastly preferred a more streamlined map. Another thing I didn't really like about Dread was some of the backtracking. I understand the backtracking in a Metroid game is standard and should be expected, but sometimes I just felt it was a bit unnecessary. There were points where I would get teleported to a random place in a previous section of the game just for me to pick up 1 or 2 items then return back where I came from. Normally I wouldn't really care about something like this, but for some reason Dread really seemed to catch me off guard with some of these portions. Either I already knew where I needed to go because it was super obvious, or I had to mindlessly wander around an old part of the game until I accidentally hobbled into the right room. Luckily, this didn't happen all that often. Most of the time, the path to the next upgrade made a good amount of sense, but that 1 or 2 times where I was entirely lost were just the worst. My final problem with Dread is that hard mode just makes you die faster, which artificially makes the game harder instead of actually making the challenge of hard mode interesting. Now, I don't really care all that much because I just see hard mode as more of a bonus, but it's still kinda disappointing. After 19 years of no new 2D Metroid games, I had very high expectations for Metroid Dread, and it surpassed every single one of them. I believe Dread is a game that both veterans of the series and newcomers alike will love, and while it may take a while to get used to the Metroid formula again, it is still very enjoyable once you understand it. Metroid Dread is easily my game of the year, and I can't wait to see what they have cooking for us in 2041.